running towards what they hope will be the last push of a long journey. A journey that's repeated day in, day out across the English Channel. This one, filmed earlier this year, was intercepted by French police. But those who make it to English shores face a hostile environment.
Suella Braverman's got to go!
Today, one of the government's more controversial migration policies was tested in court. The question at the heart of it all: is their plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda legal? In short, yes. After reading thousands of pages of evidence, the High Court ruled that the government's agreement with Rwanda does comply with the UN Refugee Convention and Human Rights Act, a victory for the government after widespread condemnation from within the UK and beyond.
Well, I welcome the decision of the court today. We've always maintained that our Rwanda policy is lawful. I'm pleased that was confirmed today. And this is just one part of our plan to tackle illegal migration.
The policy, first announced in April, is yet to lead to any deportations to Rwanda after 11th hour successful appeals. Those who brought today's case against the government have vowed to continue fighting.
This is a really, really brutal plan, and it's being brutal to some of the most traumatised and vulnerable people on the planet. These are people who've come from conflict zones, people who have been tortured, people who have already suffered human rights abuses. I cannot think of people who need our help more than these very few people in the world who have suffered these really, really awful things. And the fact that we are even considering putting them through more trauma, the fact that we are considering doing this to them, I just find it so deeply shocking.
But in a partial victory for those against the policy, the court said the government had not properly considered individual circumstances of each of the 8 asylum seekers involved in this case, and whether it was appropriate to send them to Rwanda, and should reassess them. One of the lawyers representing 5 of the 8 said it may have wider implications for others at risk of deportation.
Any individual now at least has the assurance from this court that what the Home Office needs to do is look at their individual particular circumstances to whether or not in their own circumstances it would not be appropriate to be removed to Rwanda. And that's something that gives individuals some hope, at least, when it comes to challenging their removal to Rwanda.
Figures show more than 40,000 people, a record number, have come from France this year. A painful reminder just last week of how risky the crossing is after these people had to be rescued from the freezing sea. For 4 others, it was too late. Today in the Commons, Labour accused the government of failing on migration.
The Home Secretary says that the asylum system is broken. Well, who broke it? Because it's ministers opposite who have been running the system for the last 12 years when they've made things worse.
Well, I'm very proud of the announcement that the Prime Minister made last week, setting out a comprehensive approach, a methodical approach, a compassionate approach to dealing with illegal migration, stopping the boats crossing the Channel. The Honourable Lady really needs to get with the programme. I invite her to reverse her opposition to our plan, come up with a methodical plan, and then let's have a proper conversation.
The government has made a high-stakes political promise to tackle migration. Suella Braverman's Rwanda dream may have been kept alive today. Their next challenge, whether they can put it into action before the next general election.
Anya Pop reporting there. Joining me now is James Wilson, Deputy Director of Detention Action, one of 3 organisations which challenged the government's Rwanda policy in the courts. James Wilson, all 12 points challenging the legality of the Rwanda policy were dismissed by the judge. It didn't breach the Refugee Convention or human rights laws, in the words of the judge. So it's a pretty comprehensive demolition of your claim, isn't it?
No, I wouldn't fully agree with that, Cathy. I mean, this is a very disappointing decision, and we are now going to carefully consider our next steps. Obviously, this was the first court to consider the lawfulness of the policy. At the moment, the decision is the policy as a whole is lawful, but the court also found that the 8 individual clients, all of whom were due to be removed to Rwanda, that there were fundamental flaws in all of their cases. So those decisions have been quashed, those cases returned to the Home Office, which is one of the things that show how flawed this policy as a whole actually is.
Right, well, you've said it's one court, it's the first court, so you will appeal, will you?
We're strongly considering those options. It's a lengthy and a complex judgment today, but we are strongly considering appealing.
I mean, clearly the government expects this may go all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. several Conservative backbenchers urging the Prime Minister to override international human rights law if that happens. What would be the implications if they did that, do you think?
That would be an extremely serious step, but it's important to note we're a number of steps away from the European Court being involved in considering this policy. The first step in terms of appeal would be to the Court of Appeal in London, so we're a number of steps away from that. But ultimately, it is very important that any decisions by the European Court are respected. I think fundamentally the questions about this policy go beyond lawfulness. It's not just enough for a policy to be lawful. It also, like this, it needs to be humane, it needs to be ethical, it's workable, it needs to be workable. We say it's none of those things.
But if it's inhumane or unworkable, but if the courts clear it, there's nothing really you can do to block it then, is there?
Well, I think one way or another we need to keep campaigning against this policy. It's a policy without any merits that we can see. So far, £140 million of taxpayers' money has been given to Rwanda. Nobody's been removed. There are serious fundamental concerns about the Rwandan state, about the asylum system and the safety of people were they to be removed there. And what we need to remember would be a one-way ticket to the country.
But nevertheless, there is growing public concern about what they see as chaos in the immigration system. 40,000 people coming across the Channel by small boats, a total of 72,000 asylum applications, double the number in 2019. You acknowledge, do you, the public pressure on the government to find a solution, no matter how radical or indeed unpalatable that might be?
Well, no one wants to see people having to take those desperate, dangerous journeys across the Channel and risking their lives. And we saw tragically just last week how serious the consequences could be. And unfortunately, it is inevitable that there will be further deaths if the Channel crossings continue in these numbers. But people would only take that journey if they felt there was no other option to do so. What the government needs to do is introduce urgently safe routes to the UK to claim asylum. And it also needs to deal with the huge asylum backlog of cases that is currently built up.
But are you expressing what the Home Secretary called today an unhealthy contempt for anyone who wants controlled migration? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
No, not at all. What we're talking about very much is introducing a new system that would allow people to travel safely. The government has increasingly put things in terms of punishing those who have had to take this dangerous journey. We say we need to put in a safe system so that people don't have to do that.
James Wilson, thanks very much. Matt.
Thanks, Catherine. Well, earlier I spoke to Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis. He strongly backs the Rwanda policy, and I began by asking what he thought of today's judgment.
What the judgment is today, Matt, is that the Rwanda policy, the offshoring of illegal economic migrants who come to this country, is in fact perfectly within the law, meets the Refugee Convention definition of rights and rules, is within the rules of the Human Rights Act 1998. And I think it's a big win for the government and ultimately means that, in my opinion, we should be starting to get those planes up into the skies and landing in Rwanda as soon as possible. But this judgment also opens the door to every single individual deportee launching an appeal. And it's just going to take too long. And therefore, it completely undermines the purpose of what you're trying to do. Well, I disagree. I think once we streamline the process and we actually enact the rest of the Nationality and Borders Act of 2022, which we haven't yet done, I think we'll start to see that right to appeal is obviously going down to 1, that you'll need to present all your evidence at the first instance rather than later down the line. I think these type of measures, as Priti Patel put in the Nationality and Borders Act, will ultimately send a very clear signal to deter people from wanting to make this journey, from choosing to get into those small boats and smash apart the operational model that the smuggling gangs and human traffickers, abhorrent as they are, trying to obviously use. The current human rights record of Rwanda is extremely dodgy. It has been criticized by the United Nations. We had the Nobel Prize-winning Dr. Bangute on the program last week who said, giving money to Rwanda is like giving money to Russia at the moment. No one's turned a blind eye to the past when it comes to Rwanda. We see it plainly, and obviously it's a dark history that has scarred not just that country, but the world. But ultimately, this is a country now with a strong human rights record. It's a country that is deemed, even by our courts today, as a safe third country. It's not a strong human rights record. It is not a strong human rights record. You know, political prisoners are locked up. Since the awful genocide that took place there, the human rights record is one that has obviously dramatically improved. It's one that our courts do deem to be a safe third country, as we saw in the ruling today. Now, Jonathan, when I spoke to you in the summer during the Tory party leadership contest, you told me on the record that if Rishi Sunak were elected Prime Minister by the Tory party, you would definitely lose your seat in the next general election. Do you still believe that? I think what the Prime Minister has done to reassure me that he gets the importance of delivering is making sure that we actually get on with the detail of trying to stop the illegal economic migrants coming over, and the detail that he's shown in the House of Commons chamber he's willing to go into to streamline the process, to deliver on the Rwanda policy. So I have firm belief that the Prime Minister knows he needs to deliver and will deliver in order to prevent the worst of all options, Matt, which is a Labour government who simply will have open borders, who simply will liberalise the immigration system, and all they'll actually end up doing is encouraging the people smugglers to keep on trying.
So are you saying, Jonathan, that the Rwanda policy of this government is the thing that might save your seat in the next election?
I think it's quite plain to see from polling, as well as being out on doors myself, Matt, that the economy and cost of living is, of course, the #1 priority. But the second most important issue that comes up on my doorsteps is what's happening in the English Channel when Stoke-on-Trent has already 800 people through the asylum dispersal scheme, has now had 2 hotels taken up, which now takes us to 1,200. Quite rightly, you understand why nearly 2,000 people in 2 weeks signed my petition to end the use of hotels in Stoke-on-Trent and say that we as a city have done our bit.
Jonathan Gallis, thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt.